or I hope it will be. That's weird. Zoom is already telling me that it's live, and YouTube isn't. I know, here we go, right, perfect. Right, that's fine. The stream is working, excellent. Okay, so if I put that, then okay, here we go. Perfect. So let's post that out onto Twitter and then we're good to go. Okay, that's working. Okay, so right, others logging in, excellent. Okay, so that is out on Twitter now, so that's perfect and we're ready. Okay. All right. Okay, I also see that we have some questions in by email already, so I'll happily post those questions to you in a moment or two. Right. Okay, let me just check. We'll start in a moment or two, just letting some more people log in. All right. Right. Okay, then. So let's make a start. We have 10 in the Zoom channel, and we've got people watching live on the YouTube stream as well. I'm trying to stream in both cases simultaneously. So welcome to this evening's webinar about the Dutch parliamentary election that concluded yesterday. My name is John Worth. For those of you that have not encountered my work in the Green Party before, I am the Deputy Chair of the Bundesarbeitsgemeinschaft Europa. So for our speakers, Rem and Kim, that's essentially the Federal Working Group on European Politics of the German Green Party. One of the chairs of the committee, Andy Wöhler, is also here in the chat, and others will join us later on, no doubt. The topic for this evening is for us in the German Green Party to learn some of the lessons, or in as far as there are lessons, for the Green movement and for the EU from the election that took place over 3 days, concluding yesterday. I am very happy to welcome two speakers to give introductions. They are Kim van Sparentak, who is a member of the European Parliament for GroenLinks, so our sister party in the Netherlands. She will speak first, and then will be followed by Rem Korteweg from the Klingendahl Institute, who will give more the European perspective on this topic. Both of our speakers will speak for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll come to a round of questions and answers. Those who are in on the Zoom meeting can pose questions via video. Indeed, if you wish to post questions via video in German, that's also absolutely fine, and I will happily translate those. Questions are also possible in the chat on the YouTube stream, which I will keep an eye on, or likewise, you can tweet me at John Worth, and I will then be happy to pose the questions to our speakers. I've asked both Kim and Rem to kind of split up to a certain extent what they're going to be talking about. Kim focusing very much on the election results and environmental questions in the election campaign and what that means for the Greens, and then moving very much on to what that means for the European Union in Rem's introduction. So without any further ado, Kim, I'd like to pass the floor over to you for your introduction, please.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. And yeah, I wish I would have been here with a more happy story, but unfortunately, we didn't do as well as we hoped in the elections yesterday. I guess you've all seen that. But I'm very happy to tell you what I have analyzed so far. I mean, we still have to really do the analysis. Not all the votes have been counted, but I'm very happy to already tell you more about how the elections went, what kind of struggles you also find when there's elections in COVID times, and how I see that certain topics have been discussed. Perhaps first of all, if you don't really know the Dutch electoral system, you might be really confused about a few of the things that I'm going to tell you. So I will start with a very, very short introduction to Dutch politics. So Dutch politics is a very pluralistic parliamentary system. We have many parties. We almost always had many parties in the parliament. We never really had a two-party system, at least not since World War II. And we have no threshold to get your party in. And then when you are in the parliament, you don't need to be in a grouping or anything. You can just be a one-party group. So this means that, you know, you have a lot of different parties in the parliament. And also that there are a lot of parties always competing in the elections. So this time 37 parties actually competed in the elections. And this ranged from, you know, the ones that you also have, you know, the far right, the liberals, the Greens. But then you also have the party that want to promote party. You also had the Farmers' Party. You had a very strong radical anti-racism party. Well, and many more. Yeah, we have a very broad scala of parties, and usually what you see during Dutch elections is that in the running up to the elections, at some point in the polls, you see two parties that are competing to be the winner. That is what you very often see. Usually that means that there's a lot of people that vote strategically for either one of those parties because they want to see that one win and lead the coalition, because we always need a coalition. This time around, it was a bit different. Actually, since the COVID crisis started, you saw that the VVD, the Mark Rutte's party, the Liberals, who were the biggest party in the last elections and were governing with D66, which is the Lib Dems, the Christian Democrats, and the Christian Union, which is a more leftist, environmental minded Christian party. Those were very, very small, and then the D66 and the Christian Democrats and the Liberals were the two bigger coalition partners. And you saw that, during the Corona crisis, the COVID crisis, actually, Mark Rutte, his party was just, increasing in the polls in the elections more and more. Like, it became a running gag, like, yeah, he will have like 130 people seats or something at some point. It was amazing. This whole rally around the flag thing, it was very clearly visible, especially because we have such a pluralistic system. It was very interesting to see. And actually what you saw, also really in the run up to the elections, when some people were like, okay, of course, the COVID rally around the flag, it happened, but perhaps towards the elections, there will be a strong competitor. But you actually saw he stayed steadily on the highest in the polls. The second party in the polls for a very long time was Wilders' party, the Party for Freedom, the PVV, which is one of the, unfortunately, quite many nowadays, far-right parties. And then you had the last days before the elections, you suddenly saw that D66, so the Lib Dems, were gaining traction. And in the end, it did become sort of an end game between D66, who had a new leader, a female leader who really showed leadership. She has a very impressive resume. She has done a lot of work for the United Nations as a diplomat, versus Mark Rutte. And she became, the sort of the image for new leadership. That was also their slogan. So it was Mark Rutte continuing what we've been doing. And D66, despite having been part of the government, managed to really get, going for new leadership, and the votes for the people who were looking for that. Well, then yesterday, of course, we had the elections, and the result was that the VVD won a few seats, despite the fact that they have been governing for 10 years now, more than 10 years, and they have had many scandals. And one scandal is perhaps important to just highlight a little bit, because a few months ago, the Dutch government actually stepped down because of a scandal which had to do with contributions you could get from the state to pay for your kids to go to a preschool or to a childcare system. And there had been a very strong scrutiny on whether people were committing fraud there. And there were a lot of people falsely accused of committing fraud, which meant that they were getting in huge debts. At least 30,000 people, but probably even more people. And with people, actually, you mean whole families, have been completely destroyed by this government. They lost their house. They often lost their partners, even people committed suicide because of the super dire situation that they were in. And the government stepped down because of that. And Mark Rutte was very often asked, okay, can you really continue after such a scandal under your leadership? And he said, well, the country will tell me during the elections. And apparently the Dutch were like, okay, we are fine with this, because he actually won seats yesterday. I still don't really understand this, but perhaps there will be an analysis and some analysis at some point that makes it make sense. But the second party that really won a lot was D66, the governing party, the person going for new leadership. Another party that won a lot was Forum for Democracy. Forum for Democracy is an even further far-right party than Wilders' party, I guess. And they actually split a few months ago because they were in huge fights. And there's also another party related to them. Actually, that is like the people that went away from that party again. So they also won quite some seats. And then there are some other newcomers. So Volt got quite some seats. They have 3 seats in the last poll I checked. And we have the Farmers Party that came in with 1 seat, and Bijeen. And Bijeen is the anti-racism, very feminist, very radical party. And they also have gotten 1 seat. But when you look at the ones that have lost, that's actually the left-wing parties. GroenLinks is unfortunately, one of the biggest losers in the election. We went from 14 seats to 8 seats. And also the Socialist Party, which is related to Die Linke in Germany, they also lost a lot of seats. So actually what you can say after these elections, when you look at the broader picture, is that the left has just been decimated in the Netherlands, and center-right and also far-right have won the elections. Now, perhaps I'll just shortly tell you a bit more about the topics, and then we can just get into the discussion. So the kind of topics that were discussed during the campaign, they were all under sort of, it felt a bit like under a blanket of the COVID crisis. So there was no opportunity really to talk about what's next. It was really about, and it was also, of course, favoring Mark Rutte, like, okay, we have to get out of this crisis and let me finish the job. So that was really a narrative that he managed to keep in. Talking about climate, they really managed to really have a few topics that we were talking about. It was not about reducing emissions or so much. It was more about, okay, do you want windmills or a nuclear power plant? That was basically where, it was just, the whole climate discussion was just made flat into this, are you being realistic or not? And then realistic was nuclear power. And then, the opposition was like, no, that's not realistic at all. And that became a very big part of the discussion. Also some discussion about biomass. Europe was all the time mentioned as the topic that wasn't mentioned. So that was also interesting. Only in the last debate, we had really one discussion about Europe, but not very strong, which is interesting actually, because Volt was quite a big winner. And of course, they're the pro-European party. And I think feminism was also became suddenly a topic because we had Women's Day and there was so much online hate against the female leaders that were running in the elections that it became a topic. And that is something very special because it's the first time that we really had a lot of women, leading the parties in an election campaign. But it also meant immediately that there was a lot of online hate. And that became also an interesting topic. Lastly, perhaps migration. I mean, that's always a topic, especially when you have a lot of far-right parties. Yeah, I think it was a bit same as always, just very racist rhetorics around it. And only 2 parties that really, really managed to have a very strong voice against it and really set a red line. And those were D66 and Bijeen. And I think they were both granted with votes because of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Kim. Very interesting introduction there, and indeed a number of questions about how that then relates to GroenLinks, which we'll come to in the discussion. I'm going to move on next to the introduction from Rem. So Rem, I'd like to give the floor to you, particularly to focus on what this might mean for the European Union, building a little bit on that last comment from Kim as well about the extent to which EU issues were actually an issue in this election or not. And what changes there might be for the Dutch approach towards the European Union institutions. So Rem, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for the invitation to join this this webinar. And it's great to meet Kim virtually. One thing which I think yesterday's election made clear is that the Netherlands is not Baden-Württemberg. And with that, I'm not just, referring to the fact that GroenLinks lost half of his seats yesterday, but the dynamic in terms of the way the Dutch electorate approached these elections, I think, is different from the way in which the dynamic is developing in Germany. And with that, I mean, Kim is absolutely right that there was a very strong rallying around the flag element. explaining Mark Rutte's success. And that's because he also said that he would stay for another term. And in the middle of a pandemic, it's a very logical response of a society to want a safe pair of hands. And the interesting parallel I see as a political scientist looking at the German elections, in Germany, we have the opposite. We have a leader who's already said that she's going to step down. She's been around for ages. And in a way that creates that creates space for other parties to do better, even in the midst of a pandemic where you would logically expect what I think we saw yesterday, a very strong rallying around the flag element. So even though I think Kim is right, it's a disappointing result for GroenLinks, if I'm looking towards sort of the German Green audience of this webinar, I wouldn't become too depressed. I don't think there's a huge amount of parallels because the dynamic is different. There's a very clear change of government taking place, obviously in Germany, or change in leadership, which you didn't have in the Netherlands, meaning that for Mark Rutte, it was a very easy campaign. It was a campaign all about, look, let's not talk about politics in the moment of national crisis. We don't need to talk about politics. We need to come together. And any other politician that wanted to talk about politics could easily be sidestepped by saying, why are you making politics out of a very tough crisis for the country? Now that Sigrid Kaag actually was able to succeed in that context is, I think, also to Kim's point, the fact that she comes across as a very strong individual with clear ambitions and also a progressive agenda, different from Mark Rutte, while having been inside the same government that was that safe pair of hands in a moment of crisis. In other words, she started to look like an acceptable progressive alternative. Now, the sad story, I think, for GroenLinks, as well as for the Social Democrats, and Kim is absolutely right, I mean, the left got completely hammered yesterday, is that Sigrid Kaag's and D66's success is the left's loss. So D66 didn't win any seats from, say, the right or from the center right. They won seats from the progressive left, from the parties actually that she needs to rely on if she wants to push forward her progressive agenda in a new coalition government. And that's, I think, an interesting little catch-22 she finds herself in right now. Now, I'll get to John's point about the EU, but I need to cover a number of issues where I think it might be relevant just to give you a little bit more insight about what happened yesterday. Turnout was massive. 83% of the Dutch population went out to vote in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of what's being considered the third wave. We have a dismal record when it comes to our vaccination strategy. We were late with masks. We were late with testing capacity. We are still in the middle of this corona pandemic, and still 83% showed up to vote. That, again, looking at Germany later on this year should, I think, give some consolation, and that you should also expect pretty high turnout figures there. Now, one of the elements I think that also Kim touched upon, and I just want to echo that, is this element of feminism in the final days of the debate. So Kaag and D66 weren't doing all that great. Mark Rutte peaked very early in his campaign, the rally around the flag slogan, and Kaag was struggling, and she really got into her stride during the first debates, which only took place about 2 weeks ago. And it became clear that she was this strong leader, but also who faced a huge amount of anti-female hatred. And that became very clear at International Women's Day. And I do think that that played a very strong role in sort of bringing the progressive vote her direction. Now, what also happened, and I do believe that also contributed, the final debate that took place the day before yesterday, she was up in a a debate together with Geert Wilders. Now, Geert Wilders and Kaag, they're like fire and ice. I mean, they don't get votes from each other. But what happened there is that Geert Wilders called her out for being a traitor for going to Iran and for wearing a headscarf. Even though that's if you go to Iran as in an official capacity, that's what you have to do. But on public television, in front of millions of people, he kind of like hissed at her and said like traitor, traitor, traitor. And I absolutely think that contributed to some undecided voters that watched this pure display of misogyny and sort of someone really trying to put someone in their place, that factored into to get I'm going to call it pejoratively the sympathy vote, but I do really think that actually played a very strong role. Now, Kim is right. Volt, interesting newcomer, +3 seats, pan-European party. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. D66, pro-European. So yes, the pro-Europeans won. At the same time, the anti-Europeans won as well. And so what I think we're facing in the Netherlands is that Europe and our approach to Europe is one of the big cleavages in the current parliament, not in the current government per se, because most parties, including D66 and Mark Rutte, have already excluded going into a coalition with either Geert Wilders or Thierry Baudet or the new Ja21, third Eurosceptic populist party. But in parliament, they will definitely put pressure in opposition, particularly on Mark Rutte, not to be too Europhile. Now, what I think we can expect in terms of EU policies of this new government of course, is going to depend on the makeup of the coalition. I think it's obvious that there will be a coalition with Mark Rutte as prime minister. I think it's somewhat less obvious, but still very, very likely that D66 will be in that coalition. But then there's an open question, who else? And this is going to be a very long coalition formation process. The reason for that is that the parliamentary arithmetic are very, very difficult. Just before we went live, I saw that there's been another update. The votes are still being counted, and D66 actually lost one of the seats that it thinks it gained. That just makes forming a coalition, getting to the magic number of 76 seats, all the more difficult. We're going to need at least 4 parties. All 4 parties will want to make a case for themselves. And if you look at D66 and VVD, they even though they're in the same European family, they think quite differently about European cooperation and European integration. The fact that D66 is the moral winner should push the party in the direction to ask for significant new momentum towards a softer stance towards Europe. The Dutch under Mark Rutte have been quite tough on Europe. Sigrid Kaag wants to be very pro-European, but she also realizes that in a coalition, she might end up still with the quite Euro-critical Christian Democrats. And so how she manages that and how Europe plays in this isn't all that clear. Some of the suggestions we are seeing over the past 24 hours is that perhaps D66 in the coalition formation negotiation is going to get one of its asks, which is a Minister for European Affairs. We don't have one at the moment. If there is a Minister for European Affairs, you would have a vocal point to ensure that government policy takes the EU into consideration, which would already be a pretty big plus. But then again, there's also the question, okay, who does that, right? Who gets that job? Because normally the Minister of European Affairs is connected to the Prime Minister, simply because the interaction with the European Council. VVD is more Euro-critical. So D66 might be able to get its Minister for European Affairs, which is a win, but not the person that they want. Then secondly, an issue is the D66 as the second party traditionally gets the Ministry of Finance. That would be huge in terms of how the Netherlands also portrays itself in Brussels, because for the Netherlands, Brussels is all about money. And the Treasury, the Dutch Finance Ministry, is very much in the driver's seat when it comes to overarching EU policy making. So would that be a difference? What we know, however, just from history, is that the color of the finance ministry doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of the policies that are pursued. There are structural reasons why the Dutch finance ministry actually pursues a quite hawkish approach to the euro. I'm not convinced that if D66 gets the finance ministry, all that much will change. What will change, and what would be already a gain, is that the European Parliament will be taken more seriously, and I think Kim would appreciate that, but also that the tone will change. And I think that that's also one of the reasons why we saw the success of Volt, that many young voters were actually quite disappointed in D66's inability to push back against the Eurocritical tendencies of Mark Rutte and the Christian Democrats while they actually were in office together. And so I think that will be a lesson that D66 will take into the coalition to ensure that there is some balance, at least in terms of tone, if not in substance. So there's still quite a number of things which are unclear. Perhaps it's just good to highlight, I know this is not the victory that, or the result that GroenLinks was looking for, but D66, even though they're in a different family, they embrace the climate agenda, perhaps in a number of areas, not the way GroenLinks would like or the Greens would like, but at least you now have a party which feels empowered and also campaigned very explicitly on the climate agenda. I mean, it was really one of their main topics, and we can debate to what extent that's, their climate approach is the right one, but at least from that perspective, you will have a stronger sort of Dutch partner in the fact that D66 is more powerful. The problem, however, is coalition formation, I expect, will take months and months. And so it will be quite some time before we actually know what happens. Final comment, John, and then I'll shut up, is that there's been some debate about the degree to which Europe was discussed in the campaign. And I mean, I've been one of them also pointing out the absence in the debates about Europe. However, we saw that in each of the party manifestos, Europe plays a very significant role. And that leads me to conclude that actually there is a very fertile ground in Dutch society to have more and more substantial debates about Europe. And I think this is also going to come to the fore, given this major cleavage that now runs through the Dutch parliament between the anti-EU and the pro-EU parties that both feel that they have so-called won the elections. So I expect, I mean, this might be sort of an open door, as we say in Dutch, but I do expect many, many more Europe-focused debates in the Netherlands to the degree that they've been absent up until now. Thanks, John.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Plenty of very interesting points to unpack there. I'm going to first of all just take one question which has come in on Twitter, which is, and I think I'd like to ask Kim about this, is to what extent or what role Volt will play in the elections or in the sort of short-term future of Dutch politics. Also seeing that in light of actually them for the first time getting a reasonable amount of votes, also even in Rhineland-Pfalz for that party, and to what extent maybe they are, I don't know whether a threat is overdoing it in terms of wording, but potentially a challenge to the Greens. So if you could answer that, and then I'll come to others in the video chat for further questions after that.
Very good question. Yeah, just to give a bit of a broader perspective, I just had a look, and so there's 3 parties that will come in the parliament with 1 seat and 4 parties with 3 seats. So that's already 7 parties, and Volt is one of them. It's really hard, or at least I find it really hard to predict, how all these small parties are going to make sure that they can really set the agenda, and also which one manages to really set some things on the agenda. I do think it is very positive that we have more European, a strong European voice in the Dutch Parliament, because you know, yeah, the way that Mark Rutte, for example, has spoken about Europe, and for example, European Parliament, you know, he famously called the European Parliament a party committee looking for a party. So I mean, yeah, that's a bit how he has seen it, and at least there might then be one party that will just all the time, you know, counter him when he used this kind of narrative. In terms of competition for the Greens, I mean, if you look at, you know, where we have lost our voters to, I think also to some extent to Volt for sure. But we are quite like much more left wing when you really look critically at the political spectrum and at our party platform. So I think in that respect, we're not per se, it's not a very big threat to us in that sense. And of course, in the European Parliament, we work together. We are in the same group, and there the collaboration works very well. So perhaps we can just be very good partners in, you know, bringing forward our progressive ideas in the Parliament. I hope so. I hope that we can work together.
Okay, I admire that spirit. It's just the difficulty in Germany is any votes going from the Greens to Volt and them not getting over the 5% hurdle then leads to essentially those votes then not getting a direct representation in Parliament. So that's just, in the German context, a small fear I have. I'd like to just give the floor next to Jonas Borgmeier here in the video, who I know had a question that he'd at least written down. Jonas, can you post that in video?
Sure, yeah, thank you so much for spending your time with us. So I was wondering, I live in Maastricht and I study here, and in the exchange with my housemates, they were talking a lot about these charismatic leaders. And when asking about the Green Party in the Netherlands, they were not really convinced about the leader. So I was wondering to what extent you've discussed how important it was Mark Rutte, and then the leader of the D66, and then you have strong right-wing oppositional leaders, and I think also in the Bayern, sorry if I mispronounce it, there were like charismatic leaders. So to what extent was maybe the Green Party lacking this? Do you think this had an effect? Maybe to both of you. Thank you.
Sure, Kim, do you want to have a go at that, and then I'll come to Rem? Or Rem, you want to go first? Go for it. Let's start with Rem, actually, from a non-directly green-connected perspective on that. Interesting.
I mean, it's a really interesting question, Jonas, because Jesse Klaver, the leader of the Green of GroenLinks, was very successful in previous elections, rightly because he was actually considered to be a very charismatic new voice. He was, I mean, as an observer, he held election rallies which had a huge amount of energy, much more than you could argue for other parties. He's young, you know, he's photogenic, and so he should have all the qualities of attracting the vote. However, I think there are two missteps that he made. One was he made it very clear in the beginning that he would only go into government as part of a left progressive group. Now, in an electoral contest where, as Kim explained, you have 37 parties to choose from, you currently have 17 parties represented in parliament, it's a pretty tough sell to say, vote for me, but you actually also have to vote for this other guy or this other lady, and only then will your vote be able to translate into a governing position. D66 was much more, I think, strategic and sort of held off on making alliances to that degree. Now, I understand the logic from the perspective of the party, that you want to move the country in a particular direction, but I don't think it played very well for the electorate. And remember, Dutch voters are notoriously unloyal. We had about 70% of the electorate was undecided last week. So people shop around and people vote strategically, whatever that means. And I think Jesse Klaver's pitch to say like, well, you know, I'll only be able to do something for you if the Social Democrats, if the Socialist Party also succeeds. And the second point I'd make is kind of related to that. He wanted to change the debate, the political debate in the Netherlands, which is, you know, is very noble. But how he did it was he put up campaign posters and basically said, you can vote for me, but I don't necessarily want you to vote for me. You can also vote for Sigrid Kaag, or vote for the leader of the Social Democrats, or vote for the leader of the Socialists. And then you could also vote for me. So it didn't really come across as, okay, I'm the man for the job. And he did that because he wanted to change the tone of the debate. But I think after, you know, the internal reflection has taken place, that will be considered to be two elements that that perhaps contributed to a less successful result than otherwise expected. Because Sigrid Kaag jumped into that vacuum and said, like, you know, I'm your gal, right? I'll be the voice of progressive the Netherlands, and I have proven that I'm able to take governing responsibility. So I think that played a role, Jonas.
Kim?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was very hard for us is that 4 years ago, when we had our biggest win ever, also with Jesse being the leading candidate, we managed to create a huge campaigning machine. You know, people were going everywhere on the streets, knocking doors, loads of young people on the streets. Jesse Klaver filled big, huge concert halls full of people. We didn't manage to do anything like that because of COVID. And it also just turned out to be very difficult, you know, to find how we should adapt to it. We have had very interesting, you know, online campaign ideas, and I think a lot of things worked. You know, we had groups sort of competing with each other who would, you know, convince the most people to vote for GroenLinks. But it's so different than when you're actually, you know, speaking with the electorate, speaking with people. So I think that's also something that was very unfortunate, that the way that we had to campaign this time, it just didn't suit the way we usually campaign at all. It was the opposite.
Can I just add a footnote to that, John? I think Kim is absolutely right. And I think this is, if you're looking at lessons to learn, I think this is one of them. It's don't expect campaigning in times of Corona to be like normal campaign. If you look at how important the media was in terms of shaping the campaign, I mean, it was the media and the broadcast stations that organized the big debates that I think were much more influential than in other times in how the electorate consumes the campaign. I mean, I for one, I have not received one flyer. I did not see any any people walking around in fluorescent coats for one or the other party. It was all taking place on television, in the talk shows, which always have an entertainment factor to them, which is tricky, and in 2 or 3 debate set pieces. That was, I think, what was very much the determining factor on how people were influenced in the campaign. There was no grassroots availability.
That's also very interesting because it triggers something in my mind from German politics at the last Bundestag election, when the debate between Martin Schulz and Angela Merkel was a point at which something sort of decisively seemed to shift against the Social Democrats. So maybe there's an interesting parallel there that could be taken forward towards the Bundestag election. So, and also, having spoken to some Green friends in Rhineland-Pfalz, they also did struggle to work out how to really effectively campaign there during COVID. So I think there's some very interesting points from both of you there. Really good. I'm going to come to Leah next, who had a question, and then I'll come to Thilo's question.
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much, and especially to Kim, because I guess especially on a day like this, there's better stuff to do at night than talk about losses. So thanks a lot for finding the time and explaining. I would like to make one comment, because actually, John, I think that we are already witnessing exactly what Rem just described in Germany, of how these TV debates become so much more important. I mean, after Sunday night and what the Green people said, this is determining so much more than ever before the setting. And this is where you get the only feeling of where you stand. So I think we already now are in this stage that these talk formats are so much more important and stuff. One other comment I would like to make, because I think now we have talked about Jesse and the leadership. I do think that there's also a lesson that he was male, which maybe we should at least mention here. It was said that with Sigrid you had like the female leadership there, but I think it's also a lesson for us Greens to take home. And I know that GroenLinks has a very special stand on like dual leadership, but just to say this as a German, it's a good idea. And then my one question was about this strategic decision to go for this coalition with the left. I mean, Rem already answered it, but maybe Kim, you also have some thoughts about this. And then another question I have is that, to my understanding, the list of GroenLinks in the later spaces was quite diverse. There were young people with migration background, but further down the list. And it seemed from also what you said now and stuff that people who wanted this went to somewhere else, so to the other parties. So is there also a lesson learned from this? Like, do they need to be more up? Didn't you manage to get through with this message that they were there somehow? Because I think it's also interesting for us from a German perspective, as all the Länder are putting up their lists in the next 2 months. And my feeling is a bit that we doing exactly the same. Like, the front runners are the people we know. And then as of 8, we put the people that are super young and have new ideas and are more diverse. So this would be interesting for me to know what your reading is of this. And one question to maybe you, Rem. You said that there's now this window of opportunity to be more pro-European or like, pro-European, we say, in the government. But then you also said that the coalition talks will take quite long. And we are expecting in Brussels that over the summer, this whole discussion about the national recovery plans and do the southern states get money or not will be quite big. And then this would happen during the coalition talks. So, I mean, there's also a lot of room to profile for Rutte again as like the super sharp, no, the Italians will not get our money kind of type. So do you see this as a threat, that he will also use this again to be this tough guy on the South? Would you say that also there's a chance for D66 to maybe change a bit this narrative or the role of the Dutch in the European family?
Excellent. So let's come to Kim first with regard to some of those issues about the list and the leadership, and then I'll come to Rem on the European point about Rutte.
Hey Leah, nice to see you again after many time. I don't remember when I last saw you first. Thank you for the questions. DO leadership, yeah, I try to bring it up sometimes, but no, it's not. We're not there. We're not ripe for the idea yet. I'm sorry. About the coalition and the leadership aspect, I think the idea makes a lot of sense. Last time we tried to be part of the government, and we walked out because we couldn't agree mainly on migration. And we realized that during those, those coalition negotiations, we didn't manage to stick together as progressive, more leftist, but mainly progressive parties. And the other parties, the right-wing parties, really managed to play us apart, and managed to get much more in the negotiations than we did. And for us, that was a reason to say, okay, people, refugees, dying, it's a no-go for us. That's why this time we wanted to be extremely clear in the elections that we would only go into a government coalition negotiations if we had strong allies on the left, or at least on the progressive side. So by saying that, we were hoping to manage to show like, hey, you've had right-wing government for 10 years. There is another option. There is an option that the left comes together and is, really the opposition against Mark Rutte. I think somewhere along the way, at least, it's very hard to react to it when you've been, very close to what has happened. But I guess while we were trying to explain why it was so important that we had a strong voice against Mark Rutte in the government coalition, it started to become too blurry for who they had to vote. Because also, the poster that Rem was talking about, like we read it like, if you vote for Jesse, then you will also get more of Sigrid, more of the other parties. But many people read it as, doesn't matter who you vote for. So yeah, that's unfortunate. I think that will be definitely part of the discussions and the evaluation. But that's all I can say for now. About the list, that's a very good question. I do think that for some part we stuck with some of the people that have really proved themselves in the top 10. And we had in the top 10 we had 2 newcomers, both young women of color, and then further up on the list we had actually many newcomers with from a very diverse background. I think it was very important for us that we would at least have the most diverse list ever. I don't know if but like when we were making the list, 15 was a very viable number. We were on 15 in the polls. So then we would have had, about half old, new people, and also quite some people of color, and also, someone from the LGBTI community. Like we would have gotten quite a diverse group. Now it's still not very clear what is going to happen, because we have this system in the Netherlands where you can have preferential votes on a candidate and then you can jump over other candidates, and very often people are voting for women and they jump over other candidates. So we will only know next week, because then they are completely done with counting everything. Then we will know exactly what will be the group that is going to get us through the coming 4 years.
Okay, Rem, quickly on the point about how Rutte will behave in the interim period while the coalition negotiations are going on.
Yeah, I think the fact that he'll be in the midst of coalition negotiations with D66 is a conditioning factor. So I think that from tomorrow onwards, you're going to see at least the indications of a change of tone, because I would expect D66 to push this argument quite hard. What happened last year with the Netherlands also raised a lot of eyebrows in The Hague. The fact that the Netherlands was so isolated in its very tough line towards the Spaniards and the Italians, and sort of insisting on, well, we can only give them extra money to deal with COVID if they also reform their economy, and perhaps the Commission should look at that at the same time. That it wasn't necessarily that the Portuguese finance minister or the Portuguese prime minister blasted the Dutch. It was the fact that the Germans did as well. And that signal was actually quite important, and I do think it started a corrective process. So, but what I worry about, what I don't expect is a sea change in the Dutch approach towards the euro. This is not, even if the D66 has the treasury or the finance ministry, it's not going to mean that all of a sudden we're going to move head over heels towards deeper Eurozone integration. No, because this is, as I said, this is structural. This is a kind of a Dutch philosophy, which is deeply ingrained in the Ministry of Finance, and also very much supported by a wide range of political groups. Don't kid yourself to a certain degree. I mean, even D66 supported a motion in Parliament last year, which said that if there is treaty change in the European Union, the Netherlands should ensure that in a new treaty, ever closer union is removed from the treaties, or at least doesn't apply to the Netherlands. And so don't consider the pro-Europeanness put it into context. That's what I would say.
That fills me with fear, because that sounds like David Cameron in the UK.
It does. No, it does. It does very much.
I think this argument about ever closer union.
No, but that's I think a clear something you need to understand about the Dutch political culture is that it's across the board. There is a certain hesitation towards finding European solutions, regardless of what the party programs say. I think Volt is the only really convinced Euro-federalist party. But as soon as you have, your hands on the keys of power, things change, and the structure starts to take a role.
Right. I'm aware that we should be coming to the end of the discussion, because we all have other things, particularly Kim after the election campaign, and probably Rem following so closely. I'm going to take one final question from Thilo, and then we'll draw this round to a close. So Thilo, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll try to not make this too long. Quick note, I actually received one flyer, and that was from GroenLinks. Oh, wait a minute, you can't see it with my background. So that worked out for this party at least. On the last point, I think that there might also be the difference that we're in the Netherlands, there's maybe currently not such an organized pro-European civil society as we're maybe used to it from Germany, right? And in Germany, we have a European movement, we have Europa Union, we have the Young European Federalists, and so on. And in the Netherlands, there is no such strong basis, or at least as how I perceive it. I've been searching and clicking around on the NOS Peilingswijzer now for a bit, and saw that there might be a possible coalition with 78 seats according to current polls for VVD, D66, together with PvdA, GroenLinks, and Volt. Do you think that such a government could possibly happen? If so, what concessions would GroenLinks, or what, maybe this is too much or so, but like I'm seeing this at 78 seats, and I think this could be like the one pro-European coalition that could emerge. But that would probably also mean a lot of concessions that GroenLinks, for example, would need to make it. On the other hand, the concessions at VVD would maybe be ready to do this. Sorry, this got a bit long, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
That's an absolutely brilliant question, and I do like Leia's contribution in the chat. You each have 1 minute to answer that. No, I'm not. I'm just kidding. But anyway, so therefore, Kim, I'd like to come to you for that, to answer that, and then I'll close also then with Rem's view on that, and then we'll draw the webinar to a close. So Kim, over to you.
Well, first of all, I think this is a highly unlikely coalition. But interesting. I didn't think of this one yet. I do think that Volt already said they are not really interested in governing, and they were already happy that they made it into the parliament and wanted to figure out how that actually works. Good for them also. But Interesting. Yeah, in terms of what, there's always, like, we're so used in the Netherlands for government coalition, that we have to, give and take. But of course, there are red lines for us. And I think when we're really talking about the European, aspect, not longer falling behind in terms of climate targets and energy targets would already, I think, be something that we would be very happy with, because we're now, for example, when it comes to renewable energy, we're I think last except for Malta, if I'm correct. Yeah. We have Shell, John. That's the thing. And a lot of gas, and which is also from Shell. And I think this would actually be a good coalition when it comes to a more humane migration policy. But actually, Mark Rutte is really priding himself on being very harsh on migration. There were many debates between him and Geert Wilders in the campaign, and they were sort of like, showing who was even more anti-migration. So it would be quite a change for him, but who knows? Yeah. I think those would be very interesting topics. I think the most important thing when it comes also to Europe, right now, the European, like when the Dutch are negotiating things in the council, when it's about social policy or, for example, gender or feminist policy, they're the ones blocking everything. And already changing from blocking to actually talking about it would already be a big step. So that could also be something positive if you have had a coalition like that.
Rem?
Yeah, very quickly. Just one footnote on what I said previously. D66, I just checked, it didn't support this motion on ever closer union, but it did pass with a big majority. So the government is actually bound by this. But just to get that out of the way. On coalitions, this is the Rubik's Cube that the Netherlands now faces. It's super difficult. It's super, super difficult. And the reason is not just because the arithmetic, but also even D66 and the VVD think very, very differently about things. And this is kind of to Kim's point. If you look at migration policy, VVD and D66, this is going to be a bloodbath in the negotiations. If you add GroenLinks in the mix of a coalition, I mean, we looked at this at the Klingenau Institute at the foreign policy positions of the different parties and where coalitions might be possible, but also where on foreign policy it would really sting. VVD and GroenLinks on migration are fire and ice. I mean, not just on migration, but let me take a European defense example. So VVD wants to ensure that the next generation of Dutch fighter aircraft, the Joint Strike Fighter, is also nuclear capable, that it is able to deliver nuclear weapons, because this is a NATO agreement. GroenLinks, as far as I'm aware, Kim, looking at you, I mean, this is a pretty tough nut to swallow. And then I'm sort of being polite. I think that would be a red line for the party. There are other coalitions which are deeply problematic. So the current coalition, together with the small Christian party and D66, it's unlikely that they will easily go into coalition together. Why? Because D66 has a very progressive approach to euthanasia, and the Christian Union has a very conservative, deeply traditional view on euthanasia. Now, D66 has said this is a red line in our negotiations. That's what they campaigned on up until the last evening before the elections. It's going to be difficult. Then which other party is going to get you over the magic number of 76? Volt, perhaps? They have the right size, but they're new. No one knows how they would govern and what they would bring to the table, let alone that it would be a loss to the VVD, because the VVD is much less pro-European than Volt is. And so that's why, I mean, going beyond the specific example that you mentioned, Thilo, this coalition formation process, even though we think, this is a no-dealer, this is the same coalition in more or less the same shape, which will continue, is not at all true. Let me finish with one other example of this, the Christian Democrats. Everyone thinks Christian Democrats, great, they'll join, they're a traditional governing party. They are the only coalition party that lost yesterday. All three other parties either increased their number of seats or stayed the same. They are the only losers of this government. Does it then seem like sensible politics to go into that exact same coalition again and say like, oh, please, I'll have a little bit more of that? Or does it make sense from the Christian Democrats' perspective to try to develop a profile of its own and really make opposition? In other words, we really can't tell at the moment where things are going to end up, except that it's going to take quite a long time and quite a lot of options, including possibly the one you mentioned, Thilo, are going to be investigated.
Right. I think on that note, well, maybe we have to ask ourselves the question, are the Dutch going to even get a government together before Germany even gets around to voting? Maybe would be a way of putting that. Fingers crossed that happens.
Interesting bet to play.
Yeah. It also makes me think that I remember I used to work on a project for the Dutch website Stemwijzer about how to giving voting advice. Maybe you need to have some kind of game of which kind of coalition you could make and which points of disagreement it would cause for the sake of explaining this one. So anyway, I would like to close the webinar there. So a warm round of applause and many thanks to both of you. It's been fascinating for me. I've learned an enormous amount this evening and I appreciate that very much. So thank you very much indeed for taking the time to do that. We'll be keeping an eye on what's going on and trying to learn some lessons, because indeed there are actually a good few parallels in all of that between what we're facing in Germany, if not at the federal level, then at least at the land level. So thank you for participating. We appreciate it very much. And good luck with the coalition formation. So bye from me. And I'll stop the live stream now, and there may indeed then be a bit more follow-up on Twitter after that. So from my side, thanks to all of you. Good night all.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.